Okay, so I'm not gonna lie. Most parenting things where I have a question, I call my mom. And I'm like, "Hey mom, how did you deal with this? What would you do in this situation?" But when it comes to social media and the internet and smart devices, I don't have that ability because she didn't grow up, or excuse me, she didn't raise us in a time where we had smart devices in our pockets at all time, where we had a little computer sitting in our laps pretty much all the time. And as millennials who are raising Gen Z and Gen Alpha, there are iPhones, there are Xboxes, there are PlayStations, there are iPads, there are smart TVs. These are all devices that our children end up having access to, oftentimes that they can access the internet. And if they are able to access the internet and Wi-Fi, there are harms and dangers that we need to know about protecting them. So since my mom couldn't help, I'm going to have an expert on today. Welcome back to Speak Out with Christine Jurgen. Today we have on Chris McKenna, who is a phenomenal man. I have followed his organization, Protect Young Eyes, that he founded for a number of years now, and have actually utilized their help with some situations that I've had with the internet and kids in general. So I knew that this was a perfect guest to have on to have this conversation about the internet and social media and smart devices. Chris, like I said, is the founder and CEO of Protect Young Eyes. Protect Young Eyes is an organization that aims to create safer digital spaces for our children by equipping us, the parent, or grandparent, maybe if you're listening to this, aunt or uncle, you guys should all be aware of these dangers that are out there. So when your grandkids or nieces or nephews are coming to your house, you can protect them as well. But they aim to create safer digital spaces by equipping us, giving us tools, and keeping us in the know, really, about the things that we need to know about as it relates to certain apps, as it relates to certain devices, and then how we can go even a step further than just the device protections that it allows, but there's Wi-Fi and router restrictions and things along those lines. So Chris is going to talk to us today, and he practices his own internet safety tips on his four amazing children. And he's regularly been featured on the news, radio, and podcasts for his research. His 2019 U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee testimony, he went and talked to Congress, you guys, was the catalyst for draft legislation and ongoing discussion that could radically change online child protection laws, and earned Protect Young Eyes the Dignity Defense Alert Award in 2020. This is an amazing organization that is doing amazing things to protect kids. I know that we're busy as parents. I know we've got a lot going on. We've got dinner that we're cooking. Some of us are working multiple jobs. Some of us are, mom and dad are working outside the home, and kids have school and they have extra activities. But if you allow your kids to have a device, please listen to this episode in its entirety. Send it to everyone you know. There are things out there that are happening as it relates to AI and deep fakes, and people have the ability to take images of us or our children and put them in positions with or without clothes that didn't actually happen because it's AI, or there's sextorting going on, and there's different ideation, suicide ideation that is affecting our children. There are kids who are being bullied into like the umpteenth degree through social media. There's just a lot, and it seems overwhelming to digest it all, and it just is, it's hard. You feel like you might want to just give up and you're like, oh, just forget it. I can't do all of it. But listen, you have to. You have to protect your kids. You have to pay attention to social media. You have to put parameters around it because it is so incredibly dangerous. You guys are going to love Chris. Thank you so much for joining the show. I want to just kind of get to the nitty gritty. But before we do, you are the CEO and founder of Protect Young Eyes. Tell me just a little bit of the backstory about Protect Young Eyes, how you guys got started, and what you do.
Sure. So, gosh, I think the context is important, Christine, because this is nothing I ever expected to be working on, right? I didn't expect to be doing this. My background, I have a degree in accounting. I went to Ernst & Young. I'm supposed to be a partner at E&Y right now. Like, that's the path I expected to be on. But the Lord called me into full-time ministry. And so I left a 12-year career in business to then run a large student ministry at a church from 2009 to 2016. And that timeline is important because if you think about 2009 to 2016, that is when we started carrying the internet with us. And that is when we put the internet in the pockets of children for the first time in human history. And that terrified me And it terrified me because I was in charge of junior high, so a large 6th through 8th grade ministry. I was also a man who had struggled with pornography for years and was able to break free with Covenant Eyes and accountability and a group of men who we walked through that issue together for a number of years together. But then I watched us put that poison in the pockets of children, and it terrified me because I knew with all the tools that I had how corrosive and destructive it was for my own life and how hopeless at times I felt and how difficult it was to resist the temptation. And then we put that in their pockets and we were all okay with it. And something about that just didn't make sense to me.
Right.
So I started doing some research. I started a small Facebook group for the parents at my church. And I found it the other day. I have this PDF document that I started dropping into this Facebook group called Digital Kids Research. And I would tell them about new apps, tell them about things that I was finding on Snapchat, on Instagram, and other places. Because if you think those apps are bad now, they are. There's a lot of things that they have released, new features that make them more engaging and more addictive to a lot of kids. But in terms of the content was even worse back in the day. It was the wild, wild west for years, and parents totally didn't know that. Well, that led to a news story here in Grand Rapids, where I'm from, where a young girl was almost kidnapped, and the news station focused on the research that I was doing because there weren't a lot of people saying, wait, back in 2015. Parents were just giving kids smartphones because it was kind of the cool and popular thing to do, right? And the island of delay, the island of let's not give our kids social media, the island of wait until high school was pretty lonely. And so this news station focused on our work as, hey, parents, here's an alternative. And that led to a lot of people then coming our way in 2015. And so I launched the website in May of 2015. And now here we are 9 years later. So this, again, call it a great accident, something I never intended to be working on, but it literally was out of wanting to help good intentional parents who are making really what I felt were uninformed, risky decisions for their children and give them better information so they can make more informed choices. They know their kids best, right? I can give recommendations, I can give my thoughts, I can give our research, but ultimately, moms and dads out there, you know your children best, caregivers, you know your kids best. I want to make sure you have the best information to make the best decision. Because it's not, well, and I'll get to that in just a minute. A lot of parents want the, what's the right age to give our kids certain access to things. We'll explore that in just a minute because I have maybe a unusual answer to that question. But I'll pause there. So that's why we do what we do. That's the mission. That's the heart behind it. We do a ton of, informative app reviews and device guides on our website. We do live presentations. We just want to educate, and educate.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a needed thing in today's day and age. And some of the questions that I'm going to ask you maybe might sound a little bit naive, might sound a little bit ignorant, because I feel like there are some parents who are on that level of just, they're fine. We want them to keep up with their friends. Everybody else has a phone or an iPad or whatever it is. So, Chris, smartphones, social media, and the internet, good or bad?
That is a excellent, and I wish I had an easy answer. Wouldn't it be great if there was just one answer like a prescription? I could say, do this, and this will be the result. But it's not that linear. My brain wants linear on this, and it just doesn't work that way. The science would say it depends, right? There are so many complicated. We have a talk that we do, Christine, on mental health technology in kids. And when you take nature and nurture and circumstances and parenting and environment, and then you put them inside of godlike technology, there are a lot of variables. Every child is a little bit different. But there's no such thing as waiting too long. And I think that's the lie that we have to overcome in our own minds as parents and caregivers. That we believe they'll be behind, we believe they'll be left out, we believe they'll get into a worse college, we believe they'll get a worse job, we believe things about not giving them access that aren't true. There is zero evidence to support that a child who does not have access to algorithmic technologies is going to be worse off. They always figure it out. They'll be fine. And that's the overall message that I want parents to receive here. Is it good or bad? Well, it's a tool. A hammer is a tool that can also murder people. So it's a tool. But I would say what's different about technology is that it's actually crafted to consume. That's different than a lot of the other tools. A hammer, you can set it on a table and it sits there. But our technology, when it's sitting with us, is constantly intelligently studying us and becoming the most engaging, addictive form of itself for the individual human that's using it. That's a different type of tool that is actually being tuned to consume my resources, right? Which are time and attention. And so that's where I want us as parents to embrace the idea that your child is fine without it. That in 9 years, I've never had a parent full of regret come to me and say, Chris, I screwed up. I totally screwed up my kid. I gave them Snapchat too late.
Yeah,
that's
right.
Never happened, right? That's never happened. And so that to me is evidence. And this isn't just a religious sort of conservative thought either. I was just in Europe with a lot of scientists and doctors and individuals who see things through a very secular scientific lens. And the chief science officer for the American Psychological Association said to me something very similar. He said, Chris, the most adjusted kids, the most well-adjusted kids relationally and socially tend to be those who have late access to technology. Why? Because the relational template is built on human-to-human interaction instead of human-to-screen interaction, and that's a different type of kid. It avoids what we're seeing now with Gen Alpha, sort of the iPad generation, where they simply don't know how to sit. They simply don't know how to speak. They simply don't know how to conduct themselves around other humans because relationally their template has been built neurologically in their brain a different way. And they don't have some of these basic relational skills. And so, is it good? Is it bad? If we don't control our technology, Christine, it will control us. And that's what's different compared to other tools that we have in our lives, particularly in the lives of our children. And I think we're backward on it right now, totally backward. We're waiting for evidence to prove why it's bad. I think we should be waiting for evidence to prove why it's good before we experiment on our children. Right. We're thinking about it totally backwards right now.
So you said something interesting of, delaying social media, and there's never a time where a parent has come to you and said, I gave my kid Snapchat too late. And I know a lot of people are thinking, well, so-and-so, my neighbor's kid is 9 years old and can code. My kid is going to be behind. And I'm thinking, as you're talking, I'm like, if my 83-year-old grandfather can figure out a smartphone and how to get on these apps, and he's able to do it, I mean, your kid at age 20 is going to be able to do it too. And I don't think that thinking that our kids are going to be behind is that great of an argument necessarily, because social media is so easy to use. They make it easy to use, right? They make it addictive. They make it to where you're going to be able to figure out social media or how to use a phone. They're very user friendly because they want you to spend more time on it. Chris, a lot of people think...
Can I poke something that you just said is really important, Christine, because you used a great example saying that, well, my son's friend knows how to code and these kinds of things. There is a big difference between a child who is technologically savvy and a child who has access to adult technologies. So, for example, I have 3 middle school boys right now. Okay, so think of me often. If you're like, whoa, I have a 6th, a 7th, and an 8th grader. My 8th grade son, I just had this conversation with him. He knows how to code. He knows how to build programs. He knows how to build simple games. He knows how to use YouTube. He knows how to use Google Classroom and to do everything he needs to for school. The boy knows how to log in, how to create accounts, how to email, how to text his friends. The boy is technologically intelligent and knows how to use all of these things and does not have a smartphone and has never used social media and does not have access to digital spaces that were not designed for him. That's the difference here. I'm all about right kid, right tech, right time. Social media is the wrong tech for children.
Yeah.
Smartphones is the wrong tech for children because it wasn't designed with them in mind. And so I am all for digital IQ. As I say to parents, Even if you've said no, talk to them about technology as if you've said yes. I want them to be technologically intelligent. I don't want them to be completely naive. Now, there's some parents who might disagree with me on that, but I am a pro-technology parent who believes that certain technologies are not right for my child, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And so do kids who have smartphones earlier have worse mental outcomes as adults later on?
That is what the evidence, there are certain, and this is where, depending on what you look at, and depending on does the data combine boys and girls, and depending on different variables. But there are some general trends that we are starting to see. And there are more and more, people who are bringing these things to light. Jonathan Haidt just created, a book and released a book, The Anxious Generation, that is getting a lot of press right now, where he sort of summarizes a lot of these studies in one place, which is fabulous. There is a difference when it comes to the genders. Guys and girls seem to be impacted uniquely and differently when it comes to certain digital spaces. Why is that? Because we know, you and I know, that females tend to struggle more with internalizing disorders like anxiety and depression when they're comparing and looking at the world and feeling the world very deeply around them. Social media tends to prey on that sort of thinking, right? So that makes girls more unique. Some of the other outcomes that we're seeing is high users during certain developmental phases tend to experience a higher rate of these internalizing disorders around anxiety and depression. And those phases are important transitional and change times, like puberty and like the transition from high school to college. High users of social media who have lower face-to-face good friendships and times with their friends tend to be those who exhibit more signs of internalizing self-harm, other disorders, when they are high users during those phases of life, that sort of adolescent phase and that transition. There's a fascinating study out of the UK that pointed toward that sort of 11 to 13 to 14 range, and then that sort of 15 to 19 range when kids are transitioning into adulthood. If most of their experiences during those phases are digital, then they tend to struggle more with some of those internalizing disorders, be it anxiety, depression, and suicidality. So those are the things that I just, again, this was something that Professor Haidt pointed out. We have, if you look at civil law, the burden of proof is a preponderance of the evidence. In other words, is it probable that this is true? If so, guilty, pay up. In a criminal case, because the risk of a false positive, you don't want to put an innocent person in jail, right? The burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. And this is where I think we have it backwards. The preponderance of the evidence, in other words, what's probably true, is that more than an insignificant number of children are harmed in some way by social media. So let's keep them out of it. Instead, why are we waiting for beyond a reasonable doubt to prove that it's hurting them? And I think that's where we have it backwards.
Yeah. Well, and I think we do have evidence that it is hurting them. But it's not just smartphones that kids can access things on. And this is something that you talk about. There's, iPads, like mentioned before. Obviously, there's laptops. There's school laptops that, schools send home with them. Xbox. What are some of these devices where kids can access harmful content, whether it be pornography or predators who are talking to them? Give us a kind of maybe just a brief rundown. I'm sure you can't list every single one of like, these are devices that you need to be aware of that your kids can access things.
Everything connected to the internet has access to all the things you just listed, Christine. I think that's an important idea for parents is to sit down and just make a list of all the possible ways that a child could get to the internet. And I think parents would be surprised as to how many doorways there are, and then how few of them they actually control. This is why we say, especially for parents of younger children, that the most important digital device in any home is the router, because many of the devices that especially younger children use and school-issued devices, they all depend on Wi-Fi. They don't have SIM cards. They're not bouncing off of a tower and using data like a smartphone or an iPad, say, that has a data plan. These are all Wi-Fi dependent. So all the things you just listed, Xbox, PlayStation, Kindle, Chromebooks, smart TVs, these are all Wi-Fi dependent devices. The only way they have access to all the things you just described is through the internet. Therefore, if you control the doorway, which is the internet signal in your home, which is what is controlled by your router, then you control the access they have to those things. That's what's really important. And that's also an important device when it comes to older children, right? I want my boys eventually, when they have a smartphone, to know, right, that we have a router in our house that controls things. Why? Because that controls burner devices, surprise devices, because we don't throw away any of our old Apple phones. Nobody does. We keep them all, and they sit around in drawers, and they all still access the internet. So we might take a primary device away, then we forget the fact that there's some iPhone 6 that's sitting in the drawer that actually now is just an iPod that still has access to the internet, even though there's no data plan attached to it, and parents forget about those devices all the time. So this is where we really have to expand our universe of thinking around smartphones to all the other things that you just listed off, and wrap multiple layers of protection around our kids when it comes to these devices. And the router is one of those very important layers that we teach all of our parents in the sessions that we do live.
Yeah, I think it's two things that you just mentioned, you know, talking about video games. I did not realize that you could access like YouTube on an Xbox. I had no idea. And I don't know if I'm just an idiot or if I'm just thinking, you know, well, video games are video games. That's all they're doing. I didn't know you could get to YouTube on an Xbox. Are you kidding me? And then once you get to YouTube, there's an endless sea of things that you can find. And then you just bring up burner devices. And I'm so glad you brought that up because that's something I wanted to talk about. You're right. People don't throw their phones away oftentimes. Some people maybe trade them in and do better at that. But we have old phones sitting somewhere. My son actually brought it up. He was like, Mom, we have like 5 phones that are just sitting there. If I really wanted to do something, I could. And not only that, but even beyond that, he's told me that people at school, when he's had his phone taken away for whatever reason, because, you know, I'm going to be very vulnerable here. I am the mom who will take a phone away if I have to. And we put a lot of restrictions on a phone, but he told me that there's people at school will say, hey, do you want a phone? Like, I've got an extra phone. I can give it to you. So it's not even just the ones you have laying around the house. Your buddies also have ones laying around the house. And they're willing to just throw you an iPhone that their parents are never going to know is gone. And then you have access to the internet all over again. So it's kind of insane. But something that you have a quote on your social media, I don't know if you said it or if it was somebody else. You said it's not just taking all of the screens away, it's also giving them back the gift of each other. And I love that so much because we're kind of missing that face-to-face interaction like you talk about. But with that, I notice, and I don't know if it's the same for you, probably not because you have every restriction possible and you know how to deal with technology. I'm a little bit less tech savvy than you are. I notice that my children are completely different people when they're off of screens. I notice when they're on screens, they're far more irritable. They don't want to hang out with the family, especially when it comes to my teenager. He's a little bit more, you know, in his own world. And then when we have screens taken away, you know, for instance, and actually we do a really good job now of limiting screen time to a bare minimum. But when he would play video games, sometimes maybe it's summer and I let him play more than I should, or he's on his phone more than he should be. And then I take it away for whatever reason. I get irritated. I'm like, you know, this is too much. You're spending too much time on this. We're done, which maybe isn't the best way to handle it. But it was, you know, something that I did. If the first day, he may be upset with me. Second day, probably a little bit too. But by day 3, he was a completely different person. He wanted to hang out with us. He wanted to spend time with us. He was interacting with us. And I'm like, this is the kid. This is the kid that I know and love. And so now we keep it to a bare minimum. But they don't have that face-to-face interaction anymore. And I notice even when I'm on my phone or I spend too much time on my phone, I'm more irritable. I respond to my children in a different way than I would like to be responding to them. I don't know if you notice that too, but I notice that I can get caught up in that. And if I can do that as an adult, imagine what it's doing to our children.
Right. So what you're explaining, Christine, whether you're 14 or 40, and that's me, I'm not saying how old you are because I wouldn't dare do that, but it's neurology. You're talking about 37. Basic neurology. And excellent. And I learned this sort of sinister truth about our brains while also being addicted to pornography. Here's the truth. Our brains crave the most efficient way to achieve certain outcomes, okay? So when it comes to, and I'll relate my experience with pornography to what you're talking about when it comes to screens. Pornography preys on neural pathways that are created inside of humans to adhere us to other humans. that intimacy with another human being, right, is neurologically created inside of us to create just an awesome connection with our spouse, okay? Pornography is a false, pixelated version of that exact same experience. And it's easier, it's more accessible, and you can do it anytime, anywhere. So over time, that's what the brain will prefer compared to a real human. And it even got to the point where I was preferring that to even, like, I was annoyed to spend time with my child because neurologically that was getting in the way of more pornography. Why? Because that was the neurological satisfying outcome that the brain wanted. That was more neurologically satisfying than spending time with my daughter. That's a horrible thing to say, but that's what neurologically an addict is always wrestling with.
Like a dopamine hit, right?
That's what it is. It's dopamine, a reward loop. The same is true with our devices. You can't blame a kid when they lash out when you take a device away, or they lash out when you tell them the game is done. Parents and caregivers, that's not your kid's fault. That should teach you something very important about your child's brain. It's not, and that's where we have to depersonalize it. And this is a quote that I learned from Tanya Jordan, the chief parent officer at Bark, a friend of mine. I've known her and the Bark team, her and Brian, for years. Fabulous organization, software that we highly recommend. Tanya said this in a webinar that I did with her years ago. She said, we have to remember that in that moment, it is brain against the game and not kid against parent. And that little mind shift changes everything, because then you're like, oh, they're not mad at me. Oh, they're not lashing out at me. This is actually harming the neurology of my child. And now you have empathy instead of anger as a parent. And we parent very differently from a position of empathy compared to anger, right? You know this, and totally. I know this. Right. And so what you're describing is just basic neurology. Of course, the constant feed of dopamine, that constant like and comment, and I get exactly what I want neurologically from my social media and the next breaking news story and the next tweet or whatever. Of course, the brain is going to preference that. Over time, it will relearn that the face-to-face is so much more satisfying. But it's a bit of a detox. It's a bit of a reset of that dopamine loop that has to take place. And so what you've observed is the same exact thing that I've experienced going through that period of addiction myself. And that's where I think as parents, when we understand what's going on up here, we make a lot more calm decisions when they do things down here that we don't understand. Which is why we spend so much time teaching about neurology in the brain and what's going on up there in our presentations that we do, because I think it totally changes the way parents parent, because the 14-year-old version of them, the 14-year-old version of you and I, Christine, would have done all of the exact same things. Totally. Our brains were no different back in the 80s and the 90s, right? When we were 14 or whatever, it's no different. We just have to remember what we've given them is so much more intelligent compared to what we had, VHS or DVD, right?
Oh, and they're meant to be addictive. I mean, they go back to the drawing board if the app is not addictive enough, is what I'm finding out, which is insane to me. So Chris, for those who do have phones, should parents be checking their kids' phones?
Absolutely. Why? Because it's theirs. It's not their kid's phone. Parent-led ownership is one of our principles. Everything connected to the internet is owned by the caregiver. Nothing is owned by the child. No grandparent should ever gift grandchildren devices for birthdays or Christmas. Don't gift them devices. You buy a device and then you allow them to use it. And this is the posture, the perspective that I want our children to know from a very young age, that everything connected to the internet is co-owned. This started very young. So my daughter is now 19. So I have 4 children, 12, 14, 14, and 19. So she's a freshman in college. And so some of this technology didn't even exist when she was going through the teenage years. It's changed so quickly. But her very first internet-connected device, Christine, was a hot pink Amazon Kindle. That was 9 years ago. I still have it. When she was 10 years old, she wanted that. And the first thing we did when we opened it up and we turned it on was we named it, because you can give the Kindle a name. And we named it Dad's and Lauren's Kindle. And the picture that we put on it was it was a selfie of her and I together. And that was the profile picture on it. Because from the beginning, I didn't want her to think it was hers. I knew that one-on-one with technology, even as a man who supposedly has a fully developed prefrontal cortex, who loves the Lord, who has all these tools, an amazing wife, an amazing family, and I still one-on-one with technology became addicted. One-on-one with tech, we all eventually make a regrettable decision. Everybody, eventually. And so from the beginning, I wanted my daughter to know that this was our device. One of the things that we say is technology is almost always better when it's a we activity and not just a me activity. Because one-on-one with these algorithms, we eventually will lose. And so that was a really important family culture sort of idea that I wanted planted in Lauren's brain from the very beginning, that this device belongs to us. Dad is always with you. You have nothing to hide. Use it well. And if you use it well, there'll be other steps, right tech, right time. And I am cheering for you. I actually want you to get this right, amazing daughter of mine. I want you to learn how to use technology well. And I am with you and for you and not against you. And that was really important. So that's what I would say.
So then she's 10 and you're kind of holding her hand a little bit more, getting her, at the time anyway, she was 10, holding her hand a little bit more, getting her used to social media and walking through that with her. Maybe when they're a teenager, they're a little bit older, you still are keeping an eye on it. But what do you think about devices in bedrooms? Should teenagers have their phones and their devices in their bedroom?
Almost always the answer is no. There are some exceptions, right? But I want parents to know that any internet connected device in a bedroom is a part of the toxic trio. The toxic trio is bedrooms, boredom, and darkness, along with technology. Whenever those three things are present with a digital device, the risk of harm goes through the roof. The risk of bad decision making goes through the roof. So never. I don't ever want a digital device in a house. You'd have to give me a specific situation that's the only place that their phone is the only thing they can access Google Classroom on, and they have to do their homework in their bedroom because we have 12 children and it's really loud everywhere else. Like, you would have to come up with some scenario where I'd have to go, okay, yeah, maybe. But for the most part, keep it out of the bedrooms. It's a better spot. There are locations. So I talked earlier about our layers of protection, Christine, Wi-Fi being one of them. Location is another layer. So the 5 layers are relationship, Wi-Fi, device, location, and apps. We do controls and monitoring in those 5 different layers. The location layer is we avoid 5 specific places whenever possible when it comes to technology. Bedrooms, bathrooms, sleepovers, grandma and grandpa's houses, and school buses. Those are 5 places where the risk of making bad digital decision goes up because of different circumstances, right? It's not hating on grandmas and grandpas. I love them, but they tend to have a home that has slightly fewer rules and slightly lower digital savviness. Maybe they've never thought about a router with controls. Maybe they don't know anything about social media. And we often will hand them a device when they go to grandma and grandpa's house so we can stay in touch with them. And now they have more access to things and we didn't even think about it, right? So I've had multiple parents come to me and say that grandma and grandpa's house was actually a trouble zone. So location matters. What you're referring to is that we behave certain ways in certain locations. And so as parents, if we're going to model that, then as moms and dads, we should probably ask ourselves the same question. Should we be using our technology to go to bed every night? Should we be watching, whatever we watch or playing whatever we play, Candy Crush, whatever it is? If we're going to say to our kids, they can't use their technology in their bedroom before they go to bed, then we should probably think pretty closely about what we're modeling for them too.
That's a good point. And one that I've actually been convicted about it myself, and not even just from a technology standpoint, but also from a marriage standpoint of
right.
A lot of times couples go to bed and they're just scrolling their phones and they're not even talking to each other. And the other night, my husband and I were doing that, and I looked over at him and I was like, this is really embarrassing that we're both on our phones right now, right next to each other, not having a conversation or doing other married things. But like, or sleeping for that matter. I mean, good grief. A lot of
Right.
us stay up way too late on these devices. So what are some of the worst apps that kids could have that you are like, these are just complete no parent should ever let their child have these apps. They're just too dangerous, even with restrictions.
Oh gosh. Well, it depends on sort of age and stage. I mean, there's the big four, right? That most parents will ask whether or not my child should have this at some point. Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, right? Those are the big four. Be Real and a few other social media apps are out there. The one that I think, there are ranges of harm here. There's like instant harm versus what I feel is more of a corrosive, almost poison over time. So Snapchat to me is the app that causes the most instant harm to young humans. It is, for some brains, it is just too overwhelming. The prospect of getting away with something, the prospect of sending something that's going to disappear, the whole premise that Snapchat was built on is secrecy. And that is just a toxic thought for some young brains. It is a dopamine supercharged engine that is just too overwhelming for some brains. And so it's the one that if a kid never uses Snapchat, they'll be fine. Never, ever, ever uses Snapchat, they'll be fine. There's very little long-term redeeming value in Snapchat for a human. And it's for a strange reason, because on the other hand, like there's Instagram, which also has vanishing messages. Instagram has a evergreen feed, as you and I know. That's how you and I actually came to know of each other, is through Instagram, through the posts that we make. And there are businesses and influencers and athletes and others who, through their posts and their reels and whatever they're doing out there, they create a bit of a brand for themselves and market themselves in that way. Why? Because it has a feed of evergreen content. Snapchat markets itself as not having that, which is why they say they're not social media. That's what actually, to me, gives them zero redeeming value in the life of a child. There's nothing necessary to instantly get back to my friends or to send them photos that disappear. There's nothing beneficial to my life about that. But there could be for Instagram. It just comes with so much other baggage that I want parents to always be aware of. And then there's TikTok, which to me is that sort of slow poison drip. Its algorithm is so addictive and its content is just so neurologically compelling, teaching young brains that it's okay to be entertained every couple of seconds, which means they can't sit still, they can't focus, right? I mean, just anything long is boring to that brain. That to me is the one that parents completely underestimate, because they look at it and go, well, it's not pornography. It's not Snapchat. It's just videos. It's sort of like a popular version of YouTube. It's okay. And that to me is the one that when it comes to like culture, when it comes to certain subtle messaging, when it comes to certain lifestyles and all kinds of just ideas, that's the one that I want parents to be really, really aware of and careful with, because over time it's a Pied Piper. And that algorithm is a flute that just causes kids to believe and see and hear and do things over time that I just think it's too much too soon. We've put 10,000 voices in front of these young developing brains when they actually need fewer voices answering life's biggest questions. And we wonder why they're confused. We wonder why they have distorted ideas that we don't understand, why they're changing their mind all the time on things. We have put way too many voices in front of them, way too many mirrors, in a time where we need fewer people saying more caring things to answer the biggest questions in life.
Well, you brought up a good point, because you said it's not, well, my kid's not looking at pornography. It's just videos on TikTok. And I would say that there are questionable, sexually inappropriate videos on TikTok that you can get a hold of. But it's not just pornography that you need to be concerned about. There are like self-harm ideation that goes around on social media. There is, eating disorders that you need to be aware of that, can be pushed at your children. There's all types of harm. It's not just pornography necessarily or addictive properties of social media. There's other things. Can you share maybe a story or two about something along those lines that you know of?
Well, parents, I'm sure, are aware of some of the challenges that have gone around, whether it was the blackout challenge, the choking challenge, the cinnamon challenge, the drop a dime when you have something partially plugged in through the prongs challenge so that it sparks. Like, those are the things, right, that all kinds of stories around those sorts of challenges. And it's just a lot of very subtle messaging that kids are going to TikTok for answers. Every young human asks big questions about purpose and about life and about meaning, about significance, about who I am, where do I belong. I want them coming more often than not to voices and places that they trust and that care about them. Not random voices all over the internet who don't care about them, who are more interested in, the name influencer should make us pause. That name is indicative of what they're trying to do. They're trying to convince your child through influence to believe the things that they're saying. And I would love a parent, every single parent, and I do this when I do teacher professional development sessions for middle school and high school. I'll ask them, how many of you actually have Snapchat, have TikTok, have Instagram, and never do enough hands go up in the air? And I want them all to open an account and create an account as if they were a teenager and live in it for a week. Walk through it, experience the videos, and ask them if those are all of the types of messages that they think are beneficial to the lives of young people. And I think parents their mind would be blown at the kinds of things that kids can watch constantly. And as soon as they start watching that little theme of things, that algorithm feeds them more of those kinds of things. And there's plenty of studies, articles that have been done about that algorithm and what it does over time. You referred to self-harm. That's sort of the rabbit hole effect, right? Where if you watch, the Wall Street Journal did a study where they created all these different test accounts. And after 30 minutes, they had looked at a few depression and self-harm videos. And after 30 minutes, 90% of the content was about depression that was being fed to them by the algorithm. And we know that young brains are subject to suggestion. Why? Because they want to fit in. Again, this is neurology. The limbic system is what's on fire during adolescence. That's I want to belong. I want to connect. I want to be in something that is, with others in a tribe of friends, right? They're looking for answers and significance. So they're vulnerable to suggestion if they think they're going to belong as a result. And this is where parents need to understand it's more than pictures. It's more than videos. This is a unique developmental time where we need to be showing them less voices, less influencers, and more of the ideas that we want them to carry into adulthood from voices that actually care about them.
Yeah, I love the 7-day rule. I think that's a great thing because if you're not using the app and you're not aware of what is on it, then you have no business giving that to your child. With Instagram alone, you mentioned that's how we met each other. I can go through my DMs and there's, this other folder where you can get messages. Maybe they're people who you haven't interacted before. I don't know exactly how certain
requests,
people go
right?
Into the
they can
folder.
request, yeah.
And I get inappropriate messages all the time. Like pornography things come through or hey, look at this, or, I don't even want to say what some of the messages are. And of course I just go through and delete them. But
right.
If you're a child and those are in your messages, you didn't even ask for them. They're there. You spoke at a Senate hearing one time that I watched the video, and you talked about you doing an experiment of acting. I think it was you who acted as if you were a 12-year-old child on social media. Share a little bit about that, if you will.
Right. Well, and Bark has also done a full video on this where they had a person impersonate through a teen's account and really took on the whole personification of a young person. But the DMs that we receive, people will just say doing really disgusting things to themselves, men who would then send us when they thought that we were a 12-year-old girl. And we told them that we're only 12, and it didn't matter. That only egged them on to send more and more content that we just received in DMs. Now, thankfully, since then, that was back in 2019. Since then, Instagram, but this is the problem. It took 10 years for them to do this. They have incorporated some of those direct message controls that you're referring to, that now if somebody isn't following you, or if you're not following the person, that when they send you, and you can toggle this on, when they send you an image or a video or something, it's blurred and blocked and you have to accept it. But none of those features existed for years and years until enough parents, I don't know, enough pressure, enough bad press, whatever, finally gets them. But, you know, that points to also needing to know that those parental controls exist. That's one of those layers, the app layer, where we enable some of these controls. But yeah, it's really important for a parent to live in the app, to experience it. I don't care what Disney princess is on the front of it. Use it for 7 days, experience the ads, because especially on iPhones and iPads, the ads don't have to obey the same, or often don't obey the same age rating as the app that was downloaded. And so plenty of stories from parents around 12 plus and 17 plus apps being advertised in 4 and 9 plus age, you know, innocent little bubble games. And then here comes an ad for, you know, gambling, or here comes an ad for very suggestive, choose your own adventure like stories, you know, erotic romance kind of stuff.
Let me ask you a question on that. That's maybe a little bit of a conspiracy theory. And I don't know, I might sound completely crazy right now. So my daughter one time was using an iPad, and I forget what the game was at the time. It had something to do with a little kitty cat. And when I was with her and would be next to her, I never saw an ad that was inappropriate. It was, you know, blinds for your house, or, you know, something about remodeling or something along those lines.
I remember you posting about this, I think.
And then when I was away from her, I heard her on this game, and then an ad comes on that says something about, you know, questioning your gender. And I was like, wait, what? Do they have the ability to use the cameras to like see if, and this sounds like so completely, I know, like bonkers, right? Even saying this out loud, but
I know.
I've heard parents say when I'm with them, I don't hear these kinds of ads, but if I've stepped away and it's just the child, I have heard inappropriate ads when it's just the child. Is that even a thing, or am I just making that up?
More than one parent has said that to me. Do I know whether or not the camera is used to know? I don't. And no one would ever admit that. I'm sure no company would ever admit that. I can just say that I've had more than one parent tell me that the content is different when their child is alone.
That's
you experienced
scary.
it. I remember when you posted that in your stories, and it was a bit of a freak out moment for more than a few of us to go, what? And that caused others to say the same thing.
Yeah, it's terrifying because, you know, a lot of times you're maybe cooking dinner or doing something and you're not really paying attention that closely, especially if an ad, you kind of almost tune it out. But that's when you almost need to be tuning in even more. You know, I know we talked a lot about teenagers and stuff too, but there's little kids who, you know, parents will let them get on YouTube, or they think YouTube Kids is safe. We were watching another video one time. My girls were, and I was on the couch next to them, and now we just don't do YouTube at all, period. It's just not allowed in our house. But there was, you know, the people who play with the dolls or the little games, and there was somebody who was
I know
saying,
where you're
like,
going.
and like everything was fine until it's like, oh, we need to change or something. And one of the person holding the dolls, you can't see them at all. You just see the dolls. And it was like, ooh, take off your clothes. And the way they said that, I was like, no, turn that off immediately. We're not doing that anymore. That's not allowed in our house. I don't care if it is YouTube Kids or if it looks child friendly or it's very colorful. Like, it's everywhere, and it's so pervasive that we can't pay attention enough almost. I mean, am I doing the right thing by just saying no YouTube?
Well, I think
especially for my littles.
For your littles, right? For littles, I think that's okay. And this is where there's a balance. So we talk about there are both technical and relational. Those 5 layers fall into either technical or relational sort of macro categories. If you are, as a parent, if you are going to allow your child to watch YouTube or YouTube Kids, then technically there's only so much you can do to prevent some of the things that you're describing, which means relationally, you have to have the kinds of conversations that parents aren't often comfortable having to say, hey, honey, if you ever see an ad that says this, this, and this, I want you to bring it to me. I'll never be mad when you do. In fact, I'll give you a high five. That's exactly the right thing to do. Let's practice that right now. Okay, I'm going to go into the kitchen. I'm going to put the iPad in your lap. I'm going to put on YouTube. I want you to pretend that you saw an ad that said these words or said this kind of thing. Okay, go. And then your child gets up, because what we teach is to put it down and tell someone. You make them get up and they walk into the kitchen, and I want them to say out loud, Mom or Dad, I saw an ad that said this. Because if we don't practice it, especially for our littles who don't think abstractly, their brains are very concrete until they get into junior high, we actually have to practice these things. So that's the relational. As I said earlier on, when you described, or had me describe kind of where Protect Young Eyes came from, I mean, for 7 years, my career was risk mitigation. That's what I did for large companies around the world, was I helped them mitigate financial reporting risk so they wouldn't become the next Enron. So I see the world through the lens of mitigating risk, both professionally and now in the digital world. You can't mitigate all of it. Like you said, there's always something that slips through, which is why it's about getting the risk down to a level based on what you know about your child and based on what you know about the digital space, to a level where you're comfortable with it. And if you feel that YouTube's technical ways of, when you have restricted mode on, still lets through stuff that you're not comfortable with, then you have to bolster that risk mitigation with relational tools to get it to a spot where you're comfortable with YouTube. It's the combination of both of those things. And that goes well even into the high school years, or when your friend, your son or daughter goes over to a friend's house. And again, you're not controlling all the things you're going to see. You say to your son or daughter all of the things that could happen wrong at the friend's house, and show them exactly what to do in that situation if they're shown something on a device that they're not supposed to see, or whatever it is. That's the relational side of it. So it's, to me, it's always about, and it's a subjective spot. I can't exactly define what the right level of risk is in every situation. But as a parent, I'm always assessing, what can I do technically through controls and toggles and software and hardware, routers and things. What can I do technically to bring the risk down? And what can I do relationally to equip my child with tools, with training, with conversations, and with practice to get that risk in this specific digital space or this specific digital situation to a spot where I'm comfortable. And then even where I'm in a spot where I'm comfortable, I finish it with, hun, no matter what I do, there's always going to be something that slips through. And I just want you to know you are never going to be in trouble when you tell me about that. Ever. Ever. And you can always land safely and softly with me. And I want us to say that phrase, something like that phrase, so often to our children, whether they're 4 or 14. That they are rolling their eyes and finishing our sentences. Like, that is something that we are consistently dripping into their lives, is that invitation of, whenever you are harmed, I will do you no further harm. And you can always land safely and softly with me, no matter what it is. They need to know that so often.
So, Chris, I want to be completely mindful of your time. I know we had some tech issues earlier. Do you have another appointment that you have to get to? Do you have a few more minutes? We're good. I want you to talk to me a little bit about sextortion. That's something that's happening and going on right now. And AI are a couple of things I want to get into, especially with the preteens and teenage years is something that we're seeing, and kids are committing suicide over this. Tell me some of these stories and what is going on, and how can we protect our kids from it?
Yeah, so this is another sort of neurology battle, Snapchat and Instagram being the primary perpetrators here, where a bad actor, right, will send a direct message to a child. They're often looking for children who show online some vulnerabilities, or sometimes it's just random messages that are sent out, okay? And through a fake account, they'll send a DM to a child, and they'll promise a nude photo, or they'll promise something. If they've discovered some kind of vulnerability about the kid, maybe it's some young lady who is exhibiting signs of not feeling great or having a hard time, they'll then maybe play the trust card, right? Or the you're beautiful card, or whatever it is. Or with young men, sextortion as an issue right now is predominantly affecting young men because they're the ones that are most vulnerable to the, whoa, I might get something if I send something sort of cause and effect here. And so when you get that DM, and it happened to a young man here in Michigan whose parents had all the right things in place, had all the controls in place, had done all the conversations, and yet a sinister event still snuck into his bedroom one night and took his life. When that DM comes, that dopamine loop is, whoa, and they're not thinking. They're just, if I send a nude photo, I'll get one back. There is no logical thinking going on in that moment. And again, that's not their fault. That's just teenage neurology. They're impulsive. That's what they do. It's a sort of a weaponization of how they've been created. And so when you send that photo, then that bad actor will then extort that child and pressure an extreme, I'll send it to everybody. Don't you dare walk away from this message or I will kill you. I will kill your sister. And they'll do all kinds of horrible things in that exchange to pressure the child to send them money and to send them more money and to send them more money. And way too many stories of young men, Walker and Jordan and other young men who have, they're no longer with us, right? And so because they felt so much pressure and so much shame from the threat of that photo or video being sent to others, that they decided to take their own life. And that's the horrible situation. Now, with the young men here in Michigan, the men were identified and they've been brought to justice and they're going through the legal system right now, but that won't bring Jordan back. So that's sextortion. How do you prevent it? You have some just brutally honest conversations with your sons and daughters, but I'm focusing specifically on sons because they're 90% of the cases right now that NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and ICAC, which is Internet Crimes Units, over 90% of the cases are young men that they're working on right now. And so you look at your sons and you say really brutally honest and direct things with them and walk through the whole scenario. Use all the words. Like, son, I'm going to say something here on your podcast that you may have to edit out. So if there's a blip here, you'll know that you had to. But you say to your sons, no dick pics. Like, you never send a picture of your penis to another person, right? You just say things out loud. You want them to be so shocked by what you're saying that they remember it almost.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of conversation that I want us to have that I think can do some good to mitigate the risk of sextortion. If you're going to give your kid Snapchat, if you're going to give your kid Instagram, just know this risk is there. Every kid who has those apps is at risk of being sextorted. Technically, you can't stop it. I mean, you can, in the settings, prevent messages from people who you don't know. Good, turn that on. You can have a private account. Good, turn that on. You can do all of those things. Something still might get through. That's where relationally with the conversations, you've got to do whatever you can just to call it all out. Put everything out in the light that could happen. Because I think when you put it out in the light, it automatically has little less control over the situation.
And not only sextortion being an issue, but now with AI, there's a whole nother issue of AI being able to take pictures that we're posting of our children, whether they're younger, from toddler age or a teenager posting pictures of themselves, can create these nude photos based on the photos that they're posting. And then they can kind of be extorted in that way too. How is AI harmful, and should we be mindful of posting ourselves on social media for the public? Once it's on the internet, you can't take it back.
That's a question I'm getting from a lot of mom influencers right now, where they're wondering how often they should be posting or what should they be posting. Should I be posting to my children online? I'm not to the point where I'm telling parents just to stop posting pictures of their kids. I mean, because it's sort of like identity theft right now. Everybody could potentially be a victim of identity theft. Mm-hmm. And because of that, that doesn't mean you stop using your credit card. You still use it and you do things to try to prevent the risk of it happening by guarding private information and so forth. But in the end, everybody still could have their identity stolen quite easily by anybody who really wants to. And the same is true for deep fake technology, which is what you're referring to with artificial intelligence. Deep fake is the ability to take a photo of any of us, and the technology can turn that photo or that video into anybody doing anything. And there's article after article right now, Christine, of primarily young teenage girls who are becoming the victims of this. Again, the algorithms are mostly trained on naked women because it's men who want to consume the content more often than not. So the deepfake technology is most often trained on creating hyper-realistic videos and photos of females. And so it's most often right now, again, young, impulsive teen boy brains who are using this technology to create deep fake pornography of their female classmates. And it's everywhere. And it's almost impossible to totally prevent. Now, there are some things that parents can do to prevent, again, to mitigate that risk to a slightly lower point. We've written a post about it that includes 15 different things that parents can do that maybe is something that could be shared with this episode in the notes.
Yeah. Parents
have found it to be really helpful, but it comes with a caveat. We can't stop this issue. We can only mitigate it to a level, and then kind of like identity theft, just hope you're not the target by a bad actor.
And I know you mentioned that we shouldn't be posting you're not to the point of saying don't post your kids online necessarily, but I'm getting there. I'm getting to that point of, some of the things I see. One time, because I used to do kind of more mom blogging more than talking about, my values and beliefs and those types of things. And I still have some old pictures on, and I've since deleted a few of them, but I had my kids in swimsuits, and there would be weird, creepy guys that would go and just like those photos of my children in swimsuits that were like 3 years old. And I was like, I'm not comfortable with this. I've heard that, the predators or, people who like these videos, they follow influencer moms because they like seeing these videos of kids. Some of their favorites are like when kids are eating ice cream. I'm getting to the point of I don't, unless it's maybe a group family photo, something I'd put on like a Christmas card or something along those lines. Right. Maybe I'm okay with something like that, but just my kids, I've been scaling back a lot of not sharing them because you never know who's watching your stuff.
Well, and what you said there is what I'm telling, and it's post as little as possible to as few people as possible. Mm-hmm. When it comes to your children, that's the overall advice that I give to parents right now. Because we tend to share a lot of personal family information with a lot of people who we only kind of know. And I just think the risk of that is great, a lot greater now than it was even just 6 or 12 months ago, because this technology is becoming so insanely smart and so good it can do anything. So yeah, like you said, not there yet, but post as little to as few. And you'll notice, if you were to go through my feed, brand-wise, Christine, it would probably benefit me to post more pictures of my children. Mm-hmm. I think that it would help more parents, more moms like you relate to us as a brand. So that's the tension that I think we all feel as, content creators and influencers online, is you and I both know that one of the things that draws people to you or draws people to me is the fact they know that you're a mom, or they know that I'm a dad, and we're in the trenches and we're dealing with cultural issues, or we're dealing with digital issues because we're right in it, just like our people who are following us, right? That's a strong thing that I want parents to know about me. So I feel this tension. So in Instagram, how that plays out is more often than not, I will share photos of my children in stories because it disappears. And I've started moving away from photos of my children in my feed. Unless if I post a photo, just for example, most recently, I did put a picture of my wife and my children on a feed post, but it was in a carousel, so it wasn't the lead image. So if someone was thumbing through my feed, they wouldn't go, ooh, they would just see a photo of the eclipse, which was the first page of the carousel, and they wouldn't know that 7 images in was a photo of my family on spring break, right? So those are some of the tactics that I'm using to mitigate the risk of that a little bit more. The people who love us the most are the ones who are actually going to go through the carousel and see that family photo. The people who are just looking for a quick like on a kid eating ice cream, they're not going to see my kids, and that's okay.
Yeah. That's good, actually.
Yep.
And I want to be mindful of parents when they're thinking about this. You know, I know some people are like, well, I have my Instagram on private or it's on lockdown, but I even go so far lately. And there's some parents who do a really good job. They might just put an emoji over their kid's face, or they blur their kid's face. I've seen that too. Or the back of their heads is all they post, which I've done some of that. You know, if it's the back of my kids, I'm not quite as concerned. But I've even gone as far to talk to my mom and say, you know, be careful of what you're posting on social media, because who do you have friends with? Who are you friends with on social media from high school that you haven't talked to in years?
Right.
And you're posting, and who knows? I mean, maybe it's just some weird, creepy person that was normal in high school, but is total pervert now. You know, I might sound crazy, but I think about that kind of stuff. And I actually have gone through my social media on Facebook, where I might post my kids a little bit more on Facebook because I have more family, but I've got friends. I'm like, I haven't talked to you in 5 years. Delete. No hard feelings, but I don't know who you are today. It was probably different from who you were in high school. And if we haven't talked in the last couple of years, or even years specifically, like, we don't need to be Facebook friends.
We don't need to. I agree.
But and telling your family, you know, like giving them boundaries of, can they post your children? What types of photos are you okay with? Asking them to be mindful of who their social media friends are, I think is important as well. There's so many questions that I want to get to, and I don't necessarily have the time for, but there was one girl that you had posted about. Her name was Molly Russell. She was a 14-year-old girl. I don't know if you remember this story.
I do from the UK. Yep. Self-harm.
Yeah. Tell me this story. So it's kind of something that I was mentioning earlier of, it's not just pornography that we're worried about. It's not just the addictive properties. There's self-harm that is ideation that is influencing our children, and the algorithm is helping that. Tell me about the story of Molly.
Yeah, Molly, an amazing, young girl. She was 12, I think, maybe at the time, but she struggled with sort of her self-esteem, right? She went online and became part of a community. The platform that she used is evading me right now, but it could have been Instagram at the time. I can't remember. But anyway, she connected with people out there and was encouraged to try different techniques around self-harm. And what she found were people that were actually encouraging her to harm herself. And a lot of these have been cleaned up. So I want to give a little bit of credit where credit is due. But there were communities of people that would actually instruct those who were experimenting with self-harm the most effective way to do it. So in other words, here's where you cut to not kill yourself. Here is where you cut to feel the most. And so it's just horrible things, right? And so these were the sorts of environments that she found herself in. And so she ended up dying as a result. And her father has been on a global crusade, working on all kinds of legislation, all kinds of advocacy around, bringing these issues to light to ensure that his daughter's legacy is one that is bringing good out of the harm that was done to her. But yeah, she found herself stuck in one of these rabbit holes where that young brain that is very easily influenced by voices and those around them, she was one that was influenced by that. And, tragically, we lost her way too soon. So.
It's devastating. Social media and technology as a whole is one of those things that I'm like, I almost wish it was never invented. There is a lot of good that comes from it, but at the same time, at what cost?
At what cost?
There's a lot of people being harmed, and it's very scary, and parents need to be aware. And I'm so appreciative of all that you guys are doing at Protect Young Eyes. You have an app as well that parents can utilize, and you have all sorts of information on your social media and on your website. Where can parents find you? So they're like, okay, I'm listening to this guy. You guys are telling me all the problems. I know I need to do something, but where do you tell me what to do? You have all that available on your website. So tell everybody where they can find you and how they can help their kids.
Yeah, we pride ourselves on being the how-to. We have schools that call us all the time who say, yeah, we had somebody come in and talk about digital safety, and now everyone's just scared and we don't know what to do. So we need to bring you in order to help us know how to handle these situations. That's why we want to make it as practical as possible, frameworks and layers, and just really lay it out. I need a picture. And so just come to the website. Just start at protectyoungeyes.com. Step by step, chat by chat. We want to show you how and prove to you that the slow tech life is a good life, that it's okay. We've been saying delay is the way. That's a hashtag that we've started using years ago that now others are using. There's even another whole business called Delay is the Way that they liked it so much. But that's our phrase, that we want to show parents how to delay, and when they give their kids certain technologies, how to help them use those technologies well. Like I said, we're a pro-technology organization. I think it's okay for kids to use some technologies while they're still under your roof, and we want to show you how. So just come to the website, start there, and if you want to migrate over to social media, right, to follow us there, great. There's a lot of ways that we can help.
And you guys are at Protect Young Eyes on Instagram, right?
That's right. Yep, Instagram, Facebook. I think it's just Protect Eyes. For the few of us, that are still out on X, not loving everything that's out there, but yeah, just Protect Young Eyes is the way. So,
I want everybody listening to follow. I mean, even if you are a parent who has allowed your teenager to listen to this, I think it's something worthwhile for even, teenagers to listen to, or parents with young kids, especially. It's not just teenagers that we need to worry about. I mean, the average age that pornography is being introduced to kids these days, I think, is 8 years old. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was either 9 or 8 last time I checked, which is absolutely insane that we're even having to worry about it that early, and heartbreaking. Chris, thank you so much for all that you're doing. Chris has been, their social media, they're very responsive. So if you ask a question, they'll help you find the answer to it or give you advice. And they share all of these amazing tips for parents and apps that you need to be aware of. Because a lot of times we're not thinking about certain apps. I know you did a post, and we won't dive too deep into it. They can find it on your social media about something to do with March Madness. And there was some backdoor loop of how to find pornography through March Madness. And no parent is even going to be linking those two things. So following you guys is obviously something I want everybody to do, especially if you're a parent or if you're a grandparent. Be aware of these things and the harms that are coming at our children, because they're coming at it. These people are coming for our children at all angles, and it's worse than we could have imagined, especially if you're not paying attention to social media and technology.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate this opportunity, Christine. Love all that you are doing to bring awareness to the right issues. And yeah, any parent, there's nothing that you are experiencing or could experience in a digital space that would surprise us. So don't let your fear or your shame get in the way of reaching out, because as you said, we truly pride ourselves on wanting to help. In fact, something new that parents will start to see who follow us is we've created a tech support space where you'll get one-on-one support for questions even faster, because it's hard, as you know, to keep up on DMs. They get lost and messy out on social media. So we want to provide that one-on-one help in a really unique way.
Chris, thank you so much for all that you're doing, and I appreciate you joining this show.
Thank you, Christine.